The first thing Kalen remembered was the scent of jasmine. It was woven into the linen of his small tunic, pressed into the oil that smoothed his hair, steeped in the warm milk they gave him at dawn. It was the smell of the garden, a walled paradise of manicured pathways, murmuring fountains and soft, perpetually shaded pavilions. He was 5, and he knew nothing of the world beyond the high, whitewashed walls topped with glazed tiles. His world was here, among the other children, dozens of them, all with eyes of varying shades of amber, gray, or deep blue, all with voices trained to gentle modulation, all moving with an unconscious, incipient grace. Their caretakers were the wardens, androgynous figures in dove-gray robes who spoke in hymns. "You are the blessed seeds," Warden Soul would sing, her fingers cool as she adjusted Kalen's posture. "You grow in the most exquisite soil. Your purpose is a sacred bloom, to give pleasure to be pleasure, to become a living poem of solace for the world weary." Kalen didn't understand the words, but he felt their meaning in the daily rituals. His lessons were not in letters or numbers, but in sensitivity. He spent hours blindfolded, learning to identify the origin of a sound, the rustle of silk from raw linen, the drip of honey water from plain rain. He was taught to distinguish hundreds of scents, to map textures with his fingertips, the vein in a leaf, the grain of different woods, the warmth gradient of sun-heated stone. Pain was a foreign concept, carefully edited out. If he stumbled, a warden was there to catch him before he hit the ground. If a child cried, they were enveloped and soothed until not a hiccup remained. Disagreements were dissolved with whispered mediation. The garden was a perfect ecosystem of ease. His only friend was Ilara, a girl with hair the color of moonlight and a laugh that sounded like chimes. At 7, they would sit by the carp pond, trailing their fingers in the water. "Do you think the fish are happy?" Ilara asked one day, her brow furrowed in a rare expression the wardens would call an unquiet line. "They are fed. The water is clean. The sun is dappled," Kalen recited, repeating a warden's lesson about their own existence. "But they only swim in circles," Ilara whispered. "They never see the river." Kalen felt a strange lurch in his stomach, a feeling with no name. He quickly focused on a play of light on water, until the feeling dissolved into aesthetic appreciation. The real training began at 10. They were separated by gender. Kalen's lessons now included the study of humors, the mapping of desire, the grammar of touch. He learned to read the subtle tells of a body, a tense jaw, a shallow breath, a flicker in the eye, and to respond with a calibrated counterpoint. A precisely placed cool hand, a harmonized sigh, a melody hummed to dissolve tension. He was taught to become a mirror, reflecting and amplifying a client's deepest cravings before they were even fully formed. His own desires were never discussed. They were irrelevant, a potential flaw in the glass. He saw Lara sometimes across the courtyards. She was learning different skills, the art of conversation as a labyrinth, dance as a narrative, song as emotional alchemy. She moved with an ethereal fluidity that made the very air seem attentive. But once he caught her eye, and for a split second, before the serene mask slid back into place, he saw not the blessed seed, but the girl by the carp pond. Confused, questioning, it was a second strange lurch in his life, stronger this time, lingering like a discordant note. At 15, the final layer was added. The history. They were gathered in the story hall, where scented smoke coiled in the lamplight. Warden Soul stood before them, her face beatific. "You are the legacy of the Athelian Dynasty," she intoned. For 300 years, while empires rose and fell on blood and steel, the Athelian kings have cultivated the only true peace, the peace of senses, the tranquility of perfect communion. We are the gentle hand that steadies the scepter, the rulers of the world, emperors, merchant princes, high priests. They bear the crushing weight of existence. They come to us broken, hardened, frayed. You are the living balm. Through you, they remember their humanity. You are not servants. You are sanctuary. You are the most sacred craft of our civilization. It sounded noble. It felt true in the perfumed air of the hall. Kalen felt a swelling of purpose. His life had meaning, beauty, and importance. The lurches, the fish, Ilara's glance. They were childhood mirages. His consecration was set for his 18th birthday. The night before, bathed in rose milk and anointed with oil of sandalwood, he was given a final private audience with Warden Soul. "You are our masterpiece, Kalen," she said, her hand on his cheek. "Your empathy index is the highest we have recorded. Tomorrow, you'll be presented to court, and your patron will claim you. A great honor. He is a powerful man, a stabilizer of empires. You will heal him." Kalen bowed his head, his heart a drum of fulfilled destiny. "Remember," she whispered, her voice taking on a new metallic edge, "the garden is your womb and your tomb. Its ways are the only ways. To question is to desecrate. To leave is to die." The words, so stark amidst the jasmine, froze him. For the first time, the underlying architecture of his paradise revealed itself. Not soft soil, but immutable stone. The lurch returned, tectonic. The next evening, in the grand atrium, he stood beside Alara and the others. They were resplendent, living jewels. The air thrummed with the music of glass harps and the low murmur of assembled royalty. From the shadows of a lattice gallery, unseen eyes assessed them. Kalen held his perfect posture, his face a serene lake. Then he saw him, his patron, Lord Vidor, a mountain of man clad in black and crimson, his face a landscape of brutal cunning and profound weariness. His eyes, like chips of obsidian, scanned the line and locked onto Kalen. There was no curiosity in that gaze, no anticipation of healing. There was only the cold assessment of man inspecting a tool and a hungry void of need that could never, ever be filled. As Lord Vidor's lips curved into a thin smile of possession, the final, horrifying piece slid into place in Kalen's mind. He was not sanctuary. He was prey, and the garden that had raised him was not a nursery for sacred beings. It was a farm, and he was ready for harvest. Lord Vidor's estate, the Onyx Keep, was a monument to grim power. It speared from a bare mountainside, all sharp angles, dark granite, and narrow windows like squinting eyes. The air here was thin, cold, and scentless but for the smell of wet stone and iron. The jasmine-soaked warmth of the garden was a fever dream from another life. Kalen's new world was a suite of rooms, beautiful, stifling, and monitored. Walls of dark, polished wood, floors covered in the densest Peluvian carpets, a bed wider than the pond he'd sat by with Alara. There were books, but only volumes of bland poetry and natural philosophy. There was a lute, but its strings were tuned to a limited, soothing scale. Every object was curated, like he was, to provide a specific, controlled experience. Lord Vidor was not a client seeking solace. He was a conqueror claiming spoils. His sessions were not about communion, but about domination. He would talk at Kalen, his voice a gravelly torrent of political machinations, betrayals, and cold fury. He demanded not empathetic listening, but awed silence. His touch was not a request, but an assertion of ownership. Kalen's training was weaponized against him. His hyper-awareness meant he felt every microaggression, every spark of contempt, with excruciating clarity. He was a sponge for psychic poison. His purpose was to be a decorative pressure valve. In public, at feasts where meat was torn from bones and wine flowed like blood, Kalen would sit at Vidor's feet, a living testament to the Lord's refinement and power, a possession more delicate and cultured than any gem or sword. Vidor would stroke his hair absently, a lord petting a prize hound, while bartering over tariffs or mercenary contracts. The horror was in the dissonance. The garden had trained him to believe he was a healer, a sacred artist. Here, he was furniture. The deep, ingrained responses of his training, the soothing touch, the harmonizing sigh, were now triggers for Vidor's cruelty. "Do not pretend to mend me, little blossom," Vidor would sneer, his fingers digging into Kalen's wrist. "I am not broken. I am the break. You are here to witness it." Kalen began to fracture. The perfect serenity beat into him for 18 years developed fault lines. He found himself staring for hours at a knot in wood grain, losing himself in its chaotic, unplanned pathways. He had nightmares of suffocation, not by hands, but by the scent of jasmine. He would catch himself humming the garden's teaching songs, then stop, a sob catching in his gorge. He was an instrument crafted for one symphony, being used to play another, cacophonous one, and his very structure was splitting from the strain. His only tether was Alara, by some cruel design or bureaucratic oversight. She had been sent to the keep as well, given a Vidor's chief tactician, a gaunt, silent man named Silas. They saw each other sometimes, in the courtyard during the mandated airings, two ghosts in silk gliding past each other under the watch of stone-faced guards. No words were exchanged, but their eyes met, and in Alara's eyes, Kaelin saw it all reflected back. The shattered serenity, the drowning confusion, the dawning horrific understanding. Her grace was now the fragile grace of a crystal vase balanced on a ledge. In her glance, he saw the question that was coalescing in his own soul. Is this all we are? One frigid afternoon, their paths crossed near a frozen fountain. The guards were momentarily distracted by a passing hawk. Alara's hand, hidden in the folds of her sleeve, brushed his. A tiny, hard object passed from her palm to his. He closed his fingers around it, his heart hammering a forbidden rhythm. Back in his room, locked away from prying eyes, he opened his hand. It was a seed, a simple, brown, ugly seed from a mountain pine, something that would never grow in the garden's curated soil. And wrapped around it, a tiny scrap of parchment, her hand writing a desperate scrawl that defied all their training in elegant calligraphy. They lied. The fish are dead in the pond. The water is stagnant. Find the river. Or dig. It was a spark in the absolute darkness of his gilded cage. The lurch in his stomach was no longer confusion. It was fury. It was purpose. The seed wasn't just a seed. It was a map, a code, a rebellion. The garden had taught them to read everything but the truth. Now he had to learn. He had to find the river, or turn his beautiful, trained hands to the ugly work of digging. His sanctuary had been a lie. His cage was real, and for the first time, he wanted to break it, even if it broke him in the process. The seed became his talisman. He hid it in a tear in the silk stuffing of his sleeping cushion, a small, hard kernel of reality in a world of suffocating illusion. It was proof that Alara's spirit and his own was not entirely eradicated. It was also a danger that could get them both reconditioned, a garden euphemism whose meaning he was starting to grimly fathom. Kaelin began to use his training against his captors. His heightened sensitivity, once a tool for pleasing, became a tool for perception. He learned the rhythms of the keep, the changing of the granite-faced guards, the hours when a household was drunk and somnolent after a feast, the secret paths of the servants who looked through him as if he were a ghost. He mapped the castle not as a collection of beautiful rooms, but as a fortress with weaknesses. His primary target was Lord Vidor's study. It was forbidden to him, a place of ugly business. One night, when Vidor was summoned to the capital on urgent and likely bloody business, Kaelin used a lock-picking technique he'd been taught to open a delicate jewelry box. The crude iron lock of the study door was different, but the principle of tension and torque was the same. After an hour of agonizing, silent work, the bolt slid back. The study was a revelation. Here, the mask of civilization was off. No soothing tapestries, no soft carpets. Just a massive ironwood desk littered with maps stuck with pins, ledgers with columns of numbers, and correspondence on cheap, rough paper. The air smelled of ink, cold metal, and a faint, coppery scent he recognized from the feasting hall. Blood. Trembling, Kaelin lit a single candle and began to search. He didn't know what he was looking for. A key, a plan, a truth, in a drawer. He found procurement orders, lists of supplies for the garden, bolts of silk, vials of scent, tons of fine flour and honey. And then another list, annual quota, 50 units mixed. Source, hinterland tributes and penal colonies. Standard screening for aesthetics and pliability. Units. The word hit him like a physical blow. He saw himself, Alara, the other children, not blesseds. Units. Beneath the orders was a ledger bound in faded green leather. It was older, its pages crackling. The heading read, Athelian Cultivation Protocols, Generational Report. His eyes flew over the clinical, chilling text. Suppression of individual volition is paramount. Attachment disorders in early childhood are desirable, creating transference dependency on the wardens. Pain aversion conditioning ensures compliance. but must be balanced with exposure-controlled, client-inflicted distress to prevent brittleness. The specimen must be resilient, not fragile. Mimetic programming through song and story effective up to age 14. After this, reinforce physical and psychological boundaries of the garden. The outside world must be framed as toxic, lethal. Final product must possess the illusion of depth and empathy, without any genuine will to self-preservation that could inconvenience the patron. Kalen's stomach twisted. He was a specimen, a final product. The sacred craft was a science of soul-breaking. He turned a page, and a name caught his eye. His own, *, Unit K, 17 male. Designation, Kalen. High empathy index. Potential for effective resonance. Recommend for high-strategy patron, e.g. military, political. To serve as emotional regulator and covert intelligence gatherer in moments of vulnerability. *, he wasn't just a toy. He was a spy, a vacuum designed to suck up secrets in the intimate, unguarded moments his training created. His entire being, his supposed gift of empathy, was a surveillance tool. The final entry he saw before a sound in the hall made him freeze was a list of decommissioned units. Next to each was a short code, *K, 12, recalcitrance, terminal repurposing. E9, emotional contamination, return to source. S22, attempted disclosure, neural scouring, *, terminal repurposing, return to source, neural scouring. The euphemisms were more horrifying than any blunt description. He imagined Alara as E9, himself as K12. The garden's tomb was not a metaphor. He blew out the candle and slipped back to his rooms, the ledger's truths burning in his mind. He was not a person. He was livestock, and the slaughterhouse had a very specific, sanitized vocabulary. The next day, during the courtyard airing, he found his moment. As he passed Alara, he whispered, the sound camouflaged by the wind, I read the ledger. We are units. K17. E9. She stumbled, ever so slightly. Her face remained a placid moon, but her eyes screamed. When she next glanced at him, it was with a new, fierce urgency. She gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod towards the keep's western wall, where the old kitchens and the mountain cliff met. Then she was gone. The river was not a metaphor either. The mountain rivers ran below the keep, heard through grates in the lower dungeons. The digging was a finding of a way out to the forgotten, filthy underbelly of the fortress. She had found a starting point. He had the motivation, now white-hot and clarifying. His fear was not gone, but had been joined by something else, a cold, clean hatred. The garden had not trained him for this. They had trained him to please, to soothe, to submit, but in their obsession with creating the perfect vessel, they had forgotten something. Even the most delicate crystal, subjected to enough pressure, can explode into shards sharp enough to cut. He was no longer a pleasure servant. He was K17, a decommissioned unit, and he was going to rewrite his own protocol. The western wall was a seam where the keep's arrogant architecture grudgingly met the ancient, unyielding mountain. Here, the polished granite gave way to older, rougher stone, stained with centuries of smoke and damp. This was the domain of the true servants, the scullery maids, the coal carriers, the men who hauled the night soil. They moved with a weary, utilitarian gait, their faces etched with a hardship the garden's wards would have found aesthetically offensive. Kalen's training was useless here. His silks marked him as a ghost from the upper floors, a thing of pity and contempt. He saw the way their eyes slid over him, not with the hungry possession of the lords or the blank supervision of the guards, but with a kind of weary disregard. He was another strange burden their world had to bear. Using his hard-won knowledge of the guard schedules, he slipped into the old kitchen complex late one night. The air was thick with the ghosts of old grease and sour ale. He moved through pantries stacked with burlap sacks, past cold, cavernous fireplaces. Following Alarius, he found a narrow corridor that sloped downward, the walls becoming damp, the torch sconces empty and rusted. The sound reached him first, a low, relentless rumble, felt in the stones beneath his feet more than heard. The river. He followed the sound to a heavy iron-bound door, warped with moisture. It was locked, but the wood around the bolt was soft with rot. He set his shoulder against it, pushing with a desperation that had nothing to do with trained grace. With a groan and a shower of damp splinters, it gave way. Beyond was not a river, but a chasm, a natural fissure in the mountain, about 10 feet wide, roared with churning, ice-melt water far below. A narrow, slick ledge ran along the wall to his left, vanishing into darkness. The only light came from a great high above, likely opening into a courtyard, casting a sickly moonlit pall over the scene. And then he saw her, Ilara, pressed against the wet wall, her pale silk gray with grime. And standing between her and the ledge, blocking her path, was Warden Sol. She looked out of place, a moth in a mine shaft. Yet her dove-gray robes were pristine, her face the same mask of benevolent calm. In her hand was not a weapon, but a small, silver censer, for which the familiar, cloying scent of jasmine wafted, perversely sweet in the foul air. "K, 17, she said, her voice a gentle chide. "And E9, you have strayed so far from the garden path. It causes me pain to see such beautiful growth become twisted." "It was all a lie," Kalen said, his voice rough, unfamiliar to his own ears. It was the first true sentence he'd ever spoken. "A lie." Sol tilted her head. "Is the sculpture a lie because the marble did not choose its form? We gave you purpose. We saved you from the vulgar, painful, short lives you were destined for. You were tributes from starving villages, orphans from plague pits. We took you and made you art." Ilara spoke, her voice trembling but clear. "You made us slaves. You killed our wills." "We refined your wills," Sol corrected, taking a step forward. The censer swung. "The world is a beast that runs on pain and power. The Athelian dynasty provides the antidote. We give the powerful a release. So they do not break the world entirely. We are the pressure valve on the boiler of civilization. You are a necessary, sacred sacrifice." "I am no one's sacrifice," Kalen snarled. He took a step, but the ledge was narrow, and Sol stood between him and Ilara. "You are what we made you," Sol said, her eyes hardening. "And you will return. A reconditioning will be extensive. Neural scouring leaves shadows. But it is better than the alternative. To be decommissioned here, in this foul place, with no beauty, no ritual. It would be a waste." She moved with a speed that belied her serene appearance, grabbing Ilara's arm. Ilara cried out, a raw, unfiltered sound Kalen had never heard from her. It shattered the last of his programming. He didn't think. He acted. His training and movement had been about fluidity and allure. Now, he used it for momentum. He launched himself forward, not at Sol, but the wall, pushing off with his feet to catapult past her on the narrow ledge. He crashed into her, not with a fighter's skill, but with the full weight of his desperation. The silver censer flew from her hand, tinkling as it vanished into the roaring darkness below. Sol stumbled, her perfect balance lost. For a second, she teetered on the edge of the abyss, her eyes wide with genuine shock, not at the fall, but at his defiance. The mirror had shattered and cut the hand that held it. Then she was gone. There was no scream, just a river, hungry, endless roar swallowing her whole. Kalen and Ilara clung to each other on the ledge, gasping. The jasmine scent was already fading, replaced by the mineral stink of water and stone. The authority of the garden, the voice that had shaped their reality since infancy, had just been silenced by the very chaos it had taught them to fear. "The river," Ilara breathed, pointing down the ledge. "It leads to a drainage grate. It's small, but we can get through. It opens onto the lower cliffs." They didn't speak again. They moved. Two ghosts in ruined silk, scrambling along the treacherous ledge. The beautiful, useless hands that had been trained to trace size on skin now clawed at cold, wet rock for purchase. The ears that had been tuned to subtle shifts in tone were filled with the deafening, honest fury of the water. They were not escaping to anything. They were escaping from. The world outside was a toxic, lethal place they'd been warned of, but it was real, and for the first time in their lives, they would choose their own pain. They found the grate, rusted and half pulled away by some long-ago rockfall. They squeezed through, cutting their fine skin on the iron, tumbling out onto a scree slope under a vast, starlit sky. The air was bitingly cold, scented of pine and snow. It was the most beautiful, terrifying thing they had ever experienced. They were free, and they were utterly, completely lost. The world beyond the garden and the keep was a cacophony. It was loud, smelly, chaotic, and achingly vibrant. The first village they stumbled upon, shivering in their torn silks, viewed them with a mixture of suspicion and pity. They were clearly not peasants, nor nobles, nor anything recognizable. Their speech, when they dared to use it, was too precise, too melodic, marking them as alien. They stole rough-spun clothes from a drying line, discarding their fine garments in a thicket like shed skins. The wool itched, a sensation so violently real it was almost comforting. They learned to beg for crusts, not with the elegant supplication they'd been taught, but with raw, desperate need. They drank from streams, their bodies, accustomed to filter water and herbal infusions, rebelling with cramps. They were masterpieces of a dead art, trying to learn the crude alphabet of survival. Kalen's empathy, his curse and his gift, was now a liability. He felt the village's collective anxiety about a poor harvest like a physical weight. A child's tantrum in the street felt like a seismic event in his nerves. He was an open wound in a world of salt and grit. Ilera fared differently. Her training in narrative and persona allowed her to craft crude stories, orphan siblings from a burned-out tailoring shop. She was better at the lie, but Kalen saw the hollow terror behind her eyes. They found work, of a sort, in a noisy, smoky tavern called the Grinning Pig. Ilera helped in the scullery. Her hands, which had danced with symbolic meaning, now red and raw from lye soap. Kalen was put to moving barrels, his body, though strong from disciplined posture, and used of brute labor. He dropped one, soaking the tavern keeper's boots. The man backhanded him across the face. The pain was astonishing, not just the physical sting, but the sheer, unadulterated realness of it. There was no warden to catch him, no philosophy to frame it. It was just violence, simple and clean. He lay on the straw-strewn floor, tasting blood, and to his own shock he laughed. A ragged, painful, genuine laugh. It was the first completely authentic emotion he had ever expressed. The tavern keeper thought him mad, and kicked him out. Ilera followed. They wandered north, following rumors of a free city, a place with no lords, no dynasties. The road was hard. One night, huddled under a hedge in a freezing rain, Ilera turned to him. "I don't know how to be," she whispered, her teeth chattering. "I know 70 ways to listen to a man's grief and make him feel it was a poem. I don't know how to tell my own. I know how to map the desire in a glance," Kalen said, the rain running down his face like tears. "I don't know what I desire." "Freedom," she said. "It's too big. It's an empty room. I don't know what to put in it." They slept, pressed together for warmth, two untuned instruments in a symphony they couldn't hear. The free city of Dunhaven was a revelation of a different sort. It was not beautiful. It was a sprawling, raucous, stinking hive of merchants, mercenaries, freed slaves, and refugees. Lawless suggestion enforced by guilds and street gangs. It was everything the garden had warned against. It was perfect. They found a derelict lean-to in a crowded alley and claimed it. They learned. Kalen, using his exquisite tactile memory, found work with a blind bookbinder, his fingers expertly sensing grain, tension, and alignment. Ilera began weaving tales for coins in the market square, her garden-honed voice now weaving not flattery, but stories of clever foxes and stubborn goats, her eyes learning to connect with her audience, not captivate them. The past was a ghost that haunted them. In quiet moments, the old songs would surface. The sight of a certain shade of blue could send Kalen into a day-long dissociation. A man with particular gait, reminiscent of Lord Vidor, would make Ilera freeze like a startled deer. One day, at the bookbinder's, Kalen was entrusted with restoring a water-damaged ledger. The feel of the paper, the smell of the mold, the columns of figures. It was too close. The ghost became a demon. He fled the shop, panicked, and didn't stop until he was at the city's high wall, looking out at the wild mountains. He was about to turn back when he saw her. A girl, maybe 12, with vacant amber eyes and a too-perfect posture, being led through crowds by a man in nondescript clothes. The man had the assessing, possessive look of a collector. The girl moved with the fluid, silent grace of the garden. The Athelian dynasty was still operating. The nightmare was ongoing. The river they had escaped to was flowing with the same poison water. He found Alara at their lean-to. He didn't need to explain. She saw it in his face. "We can't," she said, her voice small. "We can barely save ourselves." "We are the only ones who know what they are," Kalen said. The words felt strange in his mouth. They were not the words of a pleasure servant. They were the words of a person with a purpose he had chosen. "We know the protocols, the conditioning, the weaknesses." He reached into the small pouch he carried, the one that held his bookbinding tools. From the very bottom, he pulled out the pine seed, now dry and hard. He held it out to her. "We don't have to be fish," he said. "And we don't have to just swim away. We can poison the pond." A slow, fierce light dawned in Alara's eyes. It was not the simulated warmth of the garden, nor the hollow terror of the escape. It was a new thing, sharp and real. "How?" "We find others," Kalen said, his mind trained for subtlety and strategy, finally turning to a worthy cause. "Others who got out, or who want to. We learn where the new tributes come from. We tell our story, not as a poem, but as a warning, as a weapon." He closed his fist around the seed. It was no longer a symbol of a desired river. It was a seed of a different kind, one of defiance. The garden had sought to create perfect, submissive beauty. In its obsession, it had created its own perfect enemy. Two people who knew every secret of its making, who could speak its hypnotic language, and who had learned, in the crucible of the real, ugly, painful world, how to hate. They were Kalen and Alara now. K, 17, and E, 9 were dead in a mountain river. They were untuned, broken, and rebuilding themselves note by painful note. And their first composition would be a requiem for the garden, the dynasty that trained pleasure servants had, in its hubris, trained its own grave diggers. And the digging began now.